Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. It's very exciting to be doing a climate show with Joseph DeLeo. If you don't know about him, Joseph DeLeo participated in my first show on climate with Robert Felix and Dr. Timothy Ball, and it was the most powerful show that went all across the world and is still going across the world from last year. I've invited Joseph DeLeo back because he is so knowledgeable about climate and all the different areas of climate. He has one of the most popular websites on climate in the world called icecap.us. Joseph DeLeo was the first director of meteorology at the cable TV Weather Channel. He has over 30 years' experience in professional meteorology. He was the chief meteorologist at the Weather Services International Corporation, and he was senior editor of Dr. Dewpoint for WSI's popular Intellicast.com website. He's also been a college professor of meteorology at Lyndon State College. He's authored and presented a number of papers, as well as published a book focused on advanced applications enabled by new technologies and how research into ENSO and other atmospheric and oceanic phenomenon has made skillful seasonal forecasts possible. He is a certified consultant meteorologist, and he is elected a fellow of the American Meteorological Society. He served as a member and a chairman of the American Meteorological Society Committee on Weather Analysis and Forecasting. He is one of the most sought-upon people in the world to understand the context of climate, and recently with Anthony Watts, he has just authored Surface Temperature Records, a policy-driven deception, a blockbuster that will definitely introduce you to the deception that's going on with climate and weather. Let me say no more. Welcome, Joseph DeLeo, to It's Rainmaking Time. Good morning.
Good morning, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Talk about this new report that you did with Anthony Watts. What is the essence of it? Why is it important? And why should everybody download it from your site?
Well, after the release of the emails in the UK and what is now called ClimateGate, those emails came out of the East Anglia University in the UK and were very damning to the scientific community that has been a proponent of man-made global warming. Our government and the EPA try to distance themselves from that report and from the IPCC in Congress, and pointed to NOAA and NASA, our own government agencies responsible for monitoring global temperatures, as being their sources of data because their data was so reliable. Both Anthony and I have been working for a number of years uncovering all of the issues with all three databases. Those are the three centers, the one in East Anglia University, NOAA's in Asheville, North Carolina, and NASA in New York City, where they compile global temperatures and each month announce what the month average temperature was globally and how it ranked. Now, we found they all suffered from the same issues, and we thought we needed to publicize the problems that exist with the NOAA and NASA databases to show that we can't trust those to make important policy decisions, especially ones that are going to cost a lot of money for corporations, but also for individuals at this time, especially with the economy under such stress.
But I have a question, because the audience could feel for a second that maybe this is a partisan agenda that you have. Is it a partisan agenda? Is it pure science? What is your main issue with NOAA and NASA and East Anglia?
Our main issue is the misuse of the science and allowing issues to persist that produce a bias. And it's not partisan. The people I've worked with are not any particular part of the spectrum. There's a wide range from far left to far right to center. This is not a partisan issue.
For some reason, it seems like in the traditional newspapers and broadcast agencies that it's translated as a partisan issue in the way that the area of climate is being spoken about. Mm-hmm. For example, a president gets up and says, the issue is resolved. Al Gore says, the issue is resolved. The science is settled. Why isn't the science settled?
For one, the factors that really drive the science are not well understood. The climate models are failing miserably in a lot of respects. They did not foresee the drop of temperatures in the last 9 years. We did see a blip up this year due to El Nino, but temperatures had been declining from 2001 to 2009, and even Phil Jones of the East Anglia Climate Research Unit admitted to a cooling of 0.12 degrees Celsius globally.
What does that mean to us?
It means, remember, that during this whole time, CO2 has been increasing, and they said that the only factor of importance was CO2, and you can ignore the sun and all of the other factors. CO2 is going to produce this dramatic accelerating temperature rise, and if indeed over a decade, in fact, even Phil Jones admitted going back to 1995, there's no statistical warming. There's no warming, even though CO2 is increasing, then CO2 can't be driving the climate bus. It can't be the only factor that we need to worry about. There are other natural factors that are overriding any influence of man.
Talk about that because, when I was growing up, Joe, I always remember reading and hearing about the danger of carbon dioxide, CO2. Is it dangerous? Is it not? Give us the essence of what it is and what it isn't so we get it. Because most of us are scared of it. We grew up hearing it's terrible.
When we see these pictures of these belching smokestacks, even though the smoke that comes out is not, for the most part, anything but water vapor that's condensing, carbon dioxide is an invisible gas, it is not producing a significant effect on temperature. And in fact, it is a tremendous benefit. NASA identified over the last 50 years a 30% increase in crop yields with 10% more arable lands due to CO2. We're finding that CO2 in Washington, D.C. area, they're finding the trees are growing 2 to 4 times faster than they did 50 years ago thanks to this CO2, because CO2 is an important factor in photosynthesis. CO2, water, and sunshine build plant cells, and so with more CO2, plants thrive. In the greenhouses where they grow the plants that you buy in the spring that you put in your garden, they pump in CO2 at 3 times the outside CO2 concentration in order to get more growth and to make the plants look more attractive and entice you to buy them. You wind up taking them home and they seem to struggle a little bit in their new environment. Part of that is temperature, but some of that is that they're not getting as much CO2. They don't do quite as well as they did in the nurseries. In a classroom setting, or say in an auditorium at a school, or during a talk at a conference where there are hundreds of people present, they've measured CO2 concentrations as high as 5 to 10,000 parts per million, and the atmospheric concentration is about 390 parts per million. So it gets very high in some locations because we breathe it out. We emit it in combustion, but we also are a significant source ourselves of the CO2. And it's not a pollutant, it's a plant fertilizer, and we've benefited from it. We've probably fed tens of millions of more people worldwide because of the increase in CO2 in the last 100 years than we could have had CO2 remained at very low levels.
If that's so, and I accept that that's so, and I've done other interviews which have demonstrated the science of that, how is it possible that the EPA last year deemed it a toxic pollutant? I mean, that's frightening.
Well, the EPA's finding was based on an analysis done by a team that had an agenda, and the agenda was to continue the effort to control carbon and also to control how we use energy and energy sources. The EPA is, despite many tens of thousands of comments back to their proposal, their proposed endangerment finding, challenging them on all these issues, stood their ground and proclaimed it a pollutant requiring regulation and control. There are a lot of lawsuits underway to try to block that.
I think they need to be thrown out, and I'll tell you why. They just allowed the spraying of toxic chemicals in the Gulf, and they did nothing about it. Nothing. That actually made the problem worse. Now they're telling us that carbon, something we breathe out and plants use for nutrients and food, is toxic. It's crazy.